Okay, great. So for those of you who are here in person and those who are virtual, we might love when I'm talking to our virtual friends. Just straightforward. Yeah, okay. Thank you, because it's weird to not know where to look. First of all, let me just introduce myself for anyone who's just joining. I'm Dr. Boswell-McComas, a proud superintendent in County Public Schools. And I just want to say thank you for taking time out of your life to join me in our budget town hall meeting for the fiscal year 26 budget. For those, just to frame it for anyone who is watching, we introduced a preliminary budget, I think, I feel like 8 weeks ago, and then I brought forward a proposed budget on April 14th, I think it was. And we have a deficit, and our deficit is a function primarily of two things. The true root cause of our deficit is that we have had declining student enrollment really for many decades. But in the last 5 years, we have lost 224 students from our student enrollment. And during that time period, we were able to sustain as many positions as we had because we had emergency COVID grant funds. Now, those grant funds were provided to all school systems. Feel free to join the circle if you want. Those funds were provided to school systems to help with stability. They were provided to help school systems hold on to teachers when many teachers were leaving the profession. And so those funds did what they were intended to do, which was bring stability to a school system. But those funds have been fully exhausted and are no longer part of the budget moving forward. And so just to kind of frame the underlying cause of our deficit for this budget cycle, that's sort of the key pieces here. Now, this is a welcome. Thank you for coming. We're going to see how this goes, right? So we have virtual participants who are listening. Some of our virtual participants had submitted their questions in writing, and I have them here. So what I'd like to do is sort of do a bit of a back and forth, right? We'll take some questions from those of you who are here in person, and then we'll go to some virtual questions. And I will do my utmost to answer your questions with as much detail as I can. I have joining me tonight as my backup singer, Mr. Hushin and HR, who may not appreciate that. I have Mr. Poor, who is our technology, with Henry, and I'm sorry, BT, thank you. And then Ms. Stewart is also joining us. She's our financial officer. So if I need to ask one of my backup supports for further detail, I just ask that the brain only holds so many figures at one time. So why don't we go ahead and get started with one of our in-person questions and then go to a virtual question after that. Anyone? Thank you. Thank you for breaking the ice.
So my one. Obviously. What is your vision for what the schools are going to look like? I know, like, typically elementary schools have 2 teachers per grade unless there's a fluctuation in students. Currently, at the middle school, we have 5 teachers per grade, and I don't know what the high school looks like, but you're reducing it. So what is your vision for what is going to be at staffing at the schools?
Right. Well, I just had my staffing conversations with each of the principals today. So Mr. Buckle, I know you're coming from the middle school, but all of the principals got their staffing for next year. Our principals are the ones who work to design the actual schedule. So, and I know Mr. Hushin, you were involved in that conversation, and I know, why don't you share some of the detail that you remember from that?
Yeah, so what we discussed this morning with the principal, we gave them their staffing allocation to also with the idea there is a number of reductions that we have that we're confident we're going to have through attrition. They're going to have however much autonomy they can have to then staff their buildings, whether it's their grade levels or their content areas. And I know all the principals are very hard at work to trying to find a way to make that happen. There's no doubt that, class sizes are certainly going to.
Let me just comment on class size, because this is obviously sort of one of the number one points that come up in all of the budget questions and things of this nature. Eric, I'm in our classrooms. Have I been in your classroom?
Yes.
So when I'm in classrooms, our class sizes are small. I mean, like really small. I'm not exaggerating. And so even by reducing staff, and believe you me, it is the very last thing I want to do, right? I do not take any joy in closing this deficit, not any joy. But what I do know as a teacher is reducing our staffing relative to our student enrollment. We're looking at class sizes going to around 22, which sincerely is still very small compared to most school systems. Not that I want us to be in the 30 students per classroom category. I don't. I think 22 is actually still a very reasonable size. So is it what we have and what we've had for several years? No, it's not. And in terms of like that vision, if I had an unlimited resource, I personally, for middle schools, really believe in strong grade level teams, right? We don't have the resource. We don't have that luxury. Right? But if I had my choice, that's what I would choose for us if I had more resources. But in considering this, I think the class size will still be very reasonable. And I will tell you, part of those emergency grant funds to help stabilize schools during and on the heels of the pandemic was because we know when students return from the pandemic, behaviors were really difficult, right? When I'm in our schools, and I'm not saying we don't have a bad day here and there, but when I'm in our schools are not out of control. Our classrooms are not out of control, right? So we are in a different place today than we were 36, 48 months ago. Go ahead, I'm sorry. Is there more to that question?
No, that was it for that
main
question. No,
Okay.
that was it.
All right, thank you. If you don't mind, I'm going to go to a virtual question, and then we can. Or do you want me to, are you good to read, or you want me to?
If we can go either way, whichever way you're comfortable with. We don't have everyone here yet, but.
Well, I'll go ahead, I'll read. For those who joined virtually, we asked that they sign up and submit earlier. So I have the ones that were submitted by 2 o'clock today. So one question is, when will staff be let go or move, if they're being transferred from one location to another, informed. So that is an involved HR process, right? Because we are right now really focusing on our colleagues who are choosing or considering the retirement incentive, right? And we do have a number of colleagues who have taken us up on that incentive. Deadline is May 12th. And so obviously we haven't hit that deadline. There's some colleagues who are still in that discernment process to see if that's the right thing for them and their family or not. And of course, Mr. Hutchin just let people know that faculty, principals got their faculty numbers today. So I'm just saying this is a sort of like a moving complex target. So we are going to be working through that with the individuals appropriately. Our intention is to have all of that completed and sorted out before June board meeting. So that gives you, I can't give you a hard deadline because we're really working through it as promptly as we can. Because depending upon how we make out with the overall attrition of people retiring and people, resigning or moving, whatever the case may be, it minimizes the number of people who would experience a reduction in force. And I will just take the opportunity on that to say right now, based on how attrition is coming together and some of the colleagues who have decided to take the retirement incentive, we believe for our teacher category of employees that we are not likely to have to go through a reduction in force process for that category of employees. It is important, I think there is sort of a misconception in the air that only teachers are being reduced. That is inaccurate. Reductions are being made across the board in all employee categories. Teachers are 54% of our workforce. Let me make sure we've got that percentage. Black and white percentages are hard to see. 58%. So teachers comprise 58% of our workforce. Support staff is 34%. Central office is 8%. So all categories are being touched, but it's also kind of proportional, right? So that's why I think we easily kind of fell into the misperception that reductions are only teachers. But all categories are being impacted. Okay, I think that was the virtual question. I think I answered. Any next in-person question?
Can I just clarify? So
Sure.
you think at this point, with the attrition, there will not be a reduction in teachers?
We won't have to go through the reduction in force process with teachers. At this point, it's looking very hopeful that way. I can't say we've totally crossed that line,
Right.
but I mean, we are, Mr. Hessian, I don't know if you want to add, he's my HR person who is finger on the pulse moment by moment.
Yeah, so with the anticipated projected teacher cuts, we're sitting at about 26. Through attrition and some grants that we anticipate on having, 2 have been confirmed, 3 we feel pretty good about, as well as some reallocated FTEs. We believe that through internal hiring, any jobs that will be posted from these grants would only be open internally. Through all of that, we believe that this will be done through attrition, and teachers would not have to be cut or go through what is known as the reduction in force. There will definitely be transfers, but we're confident that we will not have to cut.
Do that on. Right. One of the things I want to take the opportunity to clarify, because he mentioned, again, because this is complex, right? We innately kind of want it to just be linear, but it's really multidimensional. That's simultaneously happening. We are analyzing all of our grants, and where we can shift the cost of salaries to help prevent the loss of a job onto grants, we are doing that. Now, we can't do that in all cases, but we are seeking every resource to minimize the number of personnel reductions we're making. And I will say that isn't necessarily in all instances a long-term solution, right? But it is in some ways a stopgap, at least for this financial year, since we're really at such a significant clip. And so I'll use the concentration of poverty as an example. We receive funds for concentration of poverty because our schools have such a high rate of poverty. We're bringing on 2 more schools next year, the high school and Helena. So all 5 of their schools now are eligible for those funds. You get money to hire a community schools facilitator who helps the school conduct its needs assessment and helps to stand up the services of the school. Those 2 positions will be new positions, right, that we have to have. They will be posted, we will fill them with internal people. So that's an example of how we can save by shifting over to the funding source. Same with other grants. We have applied for the Maryland Literacy Grant. That in that, if it gets approved from the state as we apply, that would give us 3 literacy coaches that would be in classrooms helping to coach through our literacy program and student, literacy needs. If we get that is grant funded through the state. Again, 3 more people would then be filling that, and their salaries would be shifted to that grant for the duration of the grant. So, and that is again one of the strategies. So we've got the retirement incentive, we've got the usage of grant to help shift resignations. Okay, that was an in-person question, I think, yes. I guess, okay. Do you have another one? Okay. I'll go to another virtual, and thank you everyone for your patience as we figure this out. This next one is, starts with a statement I just want to share, and then I'll read the question at the bottom. So it says, teachers are already facing difficulties due to ongoing staffing shortages. The continued effects of the COVID-19 pandemic have only intensified these issues, placing additional strain on instruction, classroom management, and student support. Now, with a growing budget deficit, some schools may be forced to increase class size, an action that is widely known to negatively affect student learning outcomes. At the same time, there appears to be no significant cuts to central office or board staff, creating the perception of a top-heavy school district where essential classroom positions are being sacrificed while administrative roles remain untouched. This imbalances raises serious questions about priorities and the equitable distribution of resources. Adequate and sustained funding must be directed where it matters most, to the students directly. I urge decision makers to reevaluate budget allocations and to take immediate action to protect and prioritize the classroom. So why are positions on the board not being cut? Why are no admin being cut? So let me be clear, the Board of Education itself only has one employee, and that's me. These are my employees. And again, to clarify, positions in the central office are being reduced. They are being reduced through the strategy of where there's grants that we can portion parts of their salary onto. People do not realize, but we already have a significant number of our central office staff who are actually fully funded, I should say fully funded, significantly funded through grants as it is. We have a total of 31 people in central office. Those 31 people are not all high-paid administrators with instructional credentials. We have, let's see if I got mine, just to give people a sense of what the oversized central office is, right? Again, oversized central office is 8% of the workforce. One superintendent, we have 7 people in the finance office, 7 people in instruction, 5 people in the special education. And when I cite these include secretarial positions. Human resources has a team of 4. Student services 4, technology 4, transportation 2, and we, the state has, we have a blueprint coordinator who also supervises CTE. So I know everyone believes in every school system that central office is bloated. I have worked in 4 school systems. I will tell you this central office is lean. But nevertheless, I am shifting salaries in the central office off of the operating budget onto grants. I don't know, Mr. Hutchin, do you remember the percentage of that? We were looking at, we were totaling up the portions. And I know you and Mr. were working on that in a couple different configurations.
Yeah, so we're looking at about 1 FTE over to grants with some additional work that we're doing with some updated views we got under some of our other grants regarding indirect costs. So we're working with MSD to see those costs can be used to go with the appropriate person's salary who is engaged in doing the work under that grant.
Right, right. So, for example, if you oversee, I'll use community schools as a perfect example. Community schools, you know, the concept is everything with the school. But the truth is, there is central work that has to happen to support community schools. There's reporting to the state of Maryland. There's coordination that happens across the community schools. There's also the support in hiring the community schools facilitator and supporting that person in the needs assessment process. So there is work from the central office that supports that. This year, it wasn't allowable in previous years, but starting FY26, the state legislature made amendments because while we have only had 3 community schools and we will now have 5 next year, some school systems have, I think across the state, there's something like 750 community schools. So some school systems have extensive work. Where I'm coming from, we had 200 community schools, right? And there is workload on the central team. We're now able to use a portion of that funding to help pay for the actual cost of administration. Now, so we are looking at using a small amount to help supplement the person's salary who has already for years been doing that work. Was that a virtual question or in person? I started to get myself.
I think that was a virtual.
Okay, sorry. I just a little tedious, so forgive me. Any other in-person questions? Yes, sir.
For those that are listening, this is not a question but a statement. if anybody wants to, there's a line item budget called the budget book that is available online through the Board of Education website, Kent County Public School website. Just so that you know, Superintendent McComas has done an excellent job here. I'm a numbers guy. I went through this P&L, if you will. And she really did a fantastic job of right-sizing Kent County Public School budget. There are some costs here that she has no control over. I'm going to read them, some of them to you. Retirement pension costs, $240,000 increase. No control over that. Health insurance, dang near $400,000 increase. Insurance workers' comp, another $50,000. Insurance, group pool insurance, almost $200,000. You add this up, darn near $900,000 worth of, sorry for the phone, damn near $900,000 worth of increased costs. How do you overcome that? How do you overcome that? And that's just one segment of this P&L for those that are in business. Not a lot of retained earnings, budget surpluses. So this is a right-sized budget by all intents. She needs to be applauded for what she's done, let me tell you.
Thank you, Mr. Wall. I appreciate your.
No, I said it before at the Board of Education meeting, and I'll continue to say it. This is an excellent job. Considering the fixed cost that you've had to deal with here and how you're rearranging things, this is excellent.
Thank you. I appreciate your voice in the community because it is, again, this is certainly not what I want, and certainly not what I want for my first year here at Kent County Schools, or any year for that matter. And it is, I don't go through this process light of heart. So I just, thank you. I appreciate it. Any other questions in person? Yes, ma'am.
Well, having listened to that, this is not related directly to your budget, but
Okay.
indirectly and looking to the future. Where is the relief to come from in the future as far as supplemental monies that can help the system to continue doing what needs to be done?
Thank you so much for that opportunity, because here is, and some of their written questions that were submitted virtually and other written questions that were submitted to our email link that we opened up. We opened up last week or the 14th, but I think we opened on the 14th. A number of times people are, like, kind of at what point, right? Like, how do we turn this around? Because our root cause is declining enrollment. That is our root cause, right? So, I mean, there's other contributing challenges, right? Inflation, as Mr. Wall was highlighting for us, there are fixed costs. The cost of health insurance is going to go up every year, right? It's not going down. We know salaries go up, right, for a variety of reasons, whether that's a mandated increase through legislation for some bargaining units, or if that's just we have to increase salaries to stay competitive, right, so our employees don't leave us. So there are things that are going up, but our enrollment continues to decline. And I'll just be transparent. In the Maryland planning projections, right, the state of Maryland projections, we at Kent County are projected to lose another 40 students over the next 4 years. So that's roughly about 10 more students each year is what the state projects. Now, projections can be off, right? And then we're projected to begin to grow. So what's in 4 years? 2029. In 2029, we're projected, I think, to pick up 20 students that year, and then it starts to go up very modestly. It's not like huge leaps, but we are projected to increase in enrollment. Now, what are those projections come from? I don't work at the state planning agency. I believe they're based on birth rate. There's a whole, algorithm, no doubt, that goes into the projections. That conveniently and rather nicely coincides very closely in time with, hopefully, the new middle school facility. And I will say, having worked in 3 other school systems, everywhere a new facility goes in, there is a bump up in enrollment. People are excited for their child to be in a state-of-the-art school facility. And they figure out how to get into the neighborhood or the community, the school district, that allows their child that opportunity. And so, interestingly enough, if their funding for the middle school construction stays on schedule, right, and that's like a whole nother capital budget process that we're working through, that should coincide rather nicely with what happens to be the state projections, right? So that is really the long-term relief, right? It's about regaining students in our school system. I want to take an opportunity here just to talk about, like, well, why is their enrollment declining? Where are they going, right? Because the easy urban myth is people don't like the school system stinks, and we're pulling our child out. Well, I have been analyzing the data because we keep track of when a family, a child is unenrolled, you know, where are they going? One, we have to keep track because the state, we have to report to the state, right? The state kind of is monitoring so that students aren't falling off the radar and not getting a public education or have access to a public education. What I have found over the last 3 years of data, and I just didn't have access really prior to that data set, easily available, is about 71% of our families are leaving and moving to other counties or moving to another state and enrolling their child in public education. So it's not that they are abandoning public education and going to a local private school or not. And there are some who go to local private schools, but the vast majority are going to other public schools and relocating out of Kent County. Right, so I just want to put the facts out there for you. I will be at some point putting together a presentation where you can see the data year upon year. I just haven't sat still and put the bar graph together for people. But I think it's important to know that this is, and the fundamental root cause here is declining enrollment. And until we get that enrollment turned around, we're going to continue to kind of face these challenges. But there is hope. There is hope, right? Projected enrollment is supposed to grow beginning in, let's say, 2029, and that in the middle school new facility, I absolutely believe will be a transformational impact on our school system. So I'll stop lecturing. I've been deep in this, right? So other questions? Do you have any other questions?
Well,
I think
my
you
other
sort of want to
ones were answered on your sheet.
Okay.
I wrote them out
Okay,
yesterday, so they were
Wonderful.
answered on your
Okay.
sheet.
Okay, thank you. And just so that everyone knows, we published Monday of this week budget questions that had come in between April 14th and whatever Monday's date was. They are published and on our website. I think Mr. DeVilio has created sort of, I don't know if it's Budget Central or Budget Hub, or he has a section where anyone can go and see those questions. I have subsequently received some questions on April 30th, April 29th, and then today these virtual questions. All of those will be consolidated and also publicly published. You will see in a number of instances a repeated question that different people have submitted the same question. So, but I put it on there so that people can see that this is a high frequency question.
The next person that asked a question online is here if you want them to speak.
Okay, go ahead.
Casey Bryan, if you want to unmute yourself.
I feel like I'm on radio. Hi, Casey Bryan.
Hi, I think you've already answered my question. It was just a question about the board, but you've answered that pretty well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And continue with online. Gilbert Clampett is here, didn't have a question written down, so if you'd like to unmute yourself, ask your question, you're free to do so.
Hi, Mr. Clampett. Thanks for joining us.
See, you unmuted yourself, but your audio is not coming through.
For this question, like inside the chat.
You can. If you want to send your.
Sorry, I said I'm good. I'm just listening in. Thank you, though.
Thank you, Mr. Clanford.
Oh, okay. The next person, Stephen Miller, if you want to unmute yourself and ask your question.
I have no question. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for joining, Mr. Miller.
Welcome.
Okay, yeah, what's happening on YouTube?
So we've had a couple come in, start if you're all right with kind of a two-parter, it's kind of the same vein of each other. Question came in, has any thought been given to closing the central office and moving the central office employees to the bus depot or dispersing them among the schools as a cost-saving measure?
Yeah.
That's part.
Okay, let me tackle part one. So thank you, and that was also one of the great questions. So I have been considering that and exploring that possibility because it's sensitive, right? There's, it's a little bit more involved than McComas just being like, you know what, pack up your stuff, we're rolling on the street. So, but I will share with you that one, I have been thinking about that. I am in the process of analyzing the cost, right? Because for me to bring forward a proposal like that to our board and to the county government, I need to have the facts and figures in front of me, right? So one of our to-do list, once we get through sort of like this budget deficit, is to pull out what's the electrical cost, what's the maintenance cost, what's the facility cost, right? And both this location and the depot. Now the depot location does have maintenance, it has water, like it needs some roofing work, and it needs some capital improvement project investment is what I'm trying to say. Our county has also expressed some interest in perhaps relocating their board of elections to that facility, that none of that is decided or a done deal. They've just expressed some interest. They've looked at what are some of the capital improvements that are needed for that building. And so I am analyzing that. It's premature in this moment to make that decision, but it's not off the table for consideration. Thank you. Part two.
And part two is this is another cost-saving idea possibly, but has any thought been given to creating a regional co-op, such like the ESNEC, with neighboring districts to purchase supplies, technology, etc.?
So like a cooperative for purchasing?
Yep.
We, well, I'll defer to Ms. Stewart because we do through ESMIC, for those who aren't familiar, it's the Eastern Shore Consortium of Schools. I'm probably not getting all the letters correct, but between that and the Maryland Association of Boards of Education, you know, we try to increase their scale for purchasing power, right? Because the more you purchase, the better deal you get. So when we come together, we tend to get better pricing. And I don't know if Mr. you want to add, and I don't know, I'm going to ask Angie, Ms. Noah, if you don't mind to jump in, because I know you sometimes deal with sort of how consortium purchasing can happen, so.
Or did you?
Right, like if we purchase together, we do piggyback on contracts. So what that means is, you know, if, for example, I'll pick on Harford County. Harford County negotiates some amazing deal with a vendor at a rate because their student population is much larger. We can piggyback and get the same rate that they negotiated. And so we are always looking to where across the other school systems to see where we can piggyback to take advantage of. They have a larger scale, so they get a better pricing. And so thank you for that opportunity because we do look to try to optimize where we can. And Ms. Noah, I don't know if you want to add anything.
Food service almost essentially does that, like, or across the board does that because one of the groups is the Shore 7 and some larger counties, but some of the smaller counties are able to bond together and really get the best deal for Cisco, our food vendors, and milk companies, the bread companies. Critical for us to see it.
So thank you. So that's a real example. Yes, sir.
The same goes for the ESMA Healthy Parents Alliance, which is a consortium with other Eastern Shore school systems where we go in and we have larger purchasing power. It is, you know, housed under MAID. That is a way, if we weren't a part of that consortium, we would not be able to sustain the rising health care.
right? It would be much worse than, for example, what was even cited. We also, I think through ESMIC, our utility pricing, right? Am I getting that right? We're just at a required meeting last week on our energy, and like, hey, I'm not a Wall Street kind of person, but I think they used the term commodity. I felt very fancy. I was like, I'm not really sure I know as a non-business person what that is, but I just say I know that they are constantly like monitoring to try to get our energy at the best price. Okay, thank you. You got
And
anything?
just to add so everyone's aware too, finance is working to a vendor review, and looking to go out to bid, looking at our vendors and where we can go out to bid. So that's going to be active, that's going to be a progress, but that is the continuing part that we are going to look into as well, so.
Thank you. Yes,
A
sir.
few more.
Okay, go ahead.
All right, so this next one in regards to when you were speaking of the dwindling student numbers and the projected 40 students over the next 4 years, have we tried recruiting more students to our districts? There was no advertisement for pre-K kindergarten registration made by the district on social media. And then kind of the offshoot of that is, could we offer an incentive to out-of-county employees to bring their children here to be counted in our enrollment?
I'll take the suggestion of the incentive under consideration. I have not considered any incentive for employees who live out of the district to bring their student in, but that's something that I'll take into consideration. In terms of pre-K, I know that schools I understood, but I hear that they're saying we didn't advertise on social media. So I'll take that back to our communications team, because it is true that, communication there's no such thing as enough communication, right? Because no matter how much you try to communicate, there could be somebody who's like, I didn't know. And so we'll take every suggestion we can to improve on communication.
Just for clarity, for the KCPS collective bargaining agreement for employees who live out of the county, is a provision in that agreement that they can bring their children.
Oh, okay. So it's already built into our master agreement. Yes, sir.
But, big but, that school system would lose student population, which would affect its budget. So they're not going to be apt to allow that to happen. It's like the teacher shortage. There's a nationwide teacher shortage. Governor Moore wants to set up a program where he can recruit teachers from Pennsylvania, Delaware. Well, they're doing the same thing. Delaware is trying to recruit our teachers. Pennsylvania is trying to recruit our teachers. So there's a trade-off here. So if we had teachers that were living in Queen Anne's County or Cecil County, and they drive into here and then wanted to bring their students in, I can tell you that school system wouldn't want that to happen, because that would reduce their budget.
Well, right, Mr. Wall, I would agree, they wouldn't want it to happen. There's nothing they can do to prevent it.
They can't prevent it. But
Right.
Yeah,
But you're
it would
right,
have an impact
they would
for
be
those
like,
folks.
keep our children
Yeah.
just like we are, right?
Right.
Yeah, no, you're right. It does reduce their funding, but there isn't anything that we could do to prevent them from, likewise, if we have people who live in Kent County and they work in another school system and they take their children, there's nothing I could say, no, you can't do it. But you're right. The point is we need to be competitive. And I will say one of the things that has become really clear to me, and this ties into the communication and marketing our school system, right? To get people to say, you know what, Kent County Public Schools is not the only option, is the option that I want, right? And I want to thank, we have community stakeholders who I've been working with around kind of developing this idea of really letting the community know what we do. For example, and I hope you don't mind that if I pick on you a little bit, we were just meeting the other week around our arts program, because I don't think people totally understand all the amazing opportunities our students have in our arts program. And we were discussing our students, our elementary students in Garnett had the opportunity through the art teacher to connect with local glass artists, and the children go over and they have really this unique opportunity that you're not going to have in other counties. Why? Because it's not located near a glass art, artist opportunity. So part of what I need to do in communications to make our school system more appealing and catch people's eye to consider us is really lifting up what it is we have to offer and that we are in fact already doing without even adding additional funding. So is there an in-person question now? Yes,
I'm
sir.
just wondering if you can talk about how your budget conversations are going with the commissioners at this point.
Yeah, so, I'm fortunate. First, I just want to say I'm appreciative of the question and appreciative of the commissioners in that, I've tried to be proactive around our budget. I know some of our commissioners have attended our budget meetings in person, and if they weren't able to come, I know we're watching the budget presentation. I was subsequently invited to the commissioners to answer some questions. I went, I guess that must have been April 15th, because we presented April 14th here, and then, well, maybe it was the following week. It was the week after. But I went and, I shared with them our conundrum and where we are in that process and what we're looking at. I know they encouraged us to use every penny in our budget to try to close our deficit. I know that we are the largest portion of the county budget, as is the case in every county. School systems, we tend to take up a huge amount of space in a county budget. I know they said the sooner I can bring our budget forward, the better it is for them to try to help, figure out the whole county budget. And as a partner, I did move our data. And so I am scheduled to go and we have our board vote on our final budget on Monday. And then the very next day I go to the county commissioner. So I do know that they are paying attention. I do know that they are aware of our deficit. They do know the strategies that I am putting in place to try to address the deficit and to mitigate as much impact as I can through various strategies like the retirement incentive, for example, use of grant funding, trying to fully expend all the funds that we have. And so I feel like, we're in sort of like this transparent moment of things. So thanks for the opportunity. I just want to make sure I don't speak for the commissioners in any way, shape, or form. Yes, sir.
With regard to that, I'll give you some more information if you don't mind.
I don't.
So the commissioners are really in a box as well. Not only does Superintendent McComas have an $800,000 deficit, the numbers that I saw, because I go to the budget meetings at the commissioners, because I want to see what's going on there. The overhead presentation this past Tuesday showed revenues at $67 million. That's revenue. 1/3 of that money goes to Kent County Public School Systems. The expenses, right? Revenue 67 million. Expenses were over 72 million. They have a $5 million shortfall. And that doesn't include the $800,000 that Superintendent McComas is asking extra. The county has come up with, from last year to this year, there was an $815,000 increase in funding from the county to the school system. That's a lot of money. And now we have an additional $800,000, and that's right-sizing it. Meanwhile, the commissioners are looking at all of their departments, and they've got 67 million in revenue and 72 million in expenses. That's it. Everybody is against the wall here. There's no easy fix. And if I may approach, with regard to student population, I hope that the Department of Legislative Services is correct, that we do see an increase in student population going from 2030 on out. It's very difficult. And I'm going to give you some statistics here from the state standpoint, if you don't mind. The state of Maryland is the 5th highest cost of living state in the nation. It is not easy living here. There was a delegate that not too long ago, they raised the minimum wage to $15 an hour, effective right now. And there's a delegate that wants to raise that to $20 an hour, minimum wage for the state of Maryland, because it's so expensive to live here. So when Superintendent McComas says 71% move out of the county, and 55% of those move out of state, it's probably because they can't afford to live here, you know? Kent County has the highest real estate tax rate on the Delmarva Peninsula. Of the 9 counties on the Delmarva Peninsula, Kent County has the highest real estate tax right now. Very, very difficult when you can go over to Delaware, and you brought up Delaware the other night, that some moved to Delaware, where your real estate taxes are 1/2 to 1/3 what they are here. So there is an economy of scale here. I hope the Department of Legislative Services and their algorithm is spot on, and that we do see an increase in student population. But the reality is, our young family is going to be able to live not only in Kent County, but in the state of Maryland, because it's getting so expensive to live here. And you're shaking your head, yes. It's tough. So there has to be a little offsetting of this utopia that we're looking at of an increase in student population, because over the next 3 years, the deficit of the state of Maryland is going to increase. We had a $3.3 billion deficit to start off the General Assembly session. By 2030, it will be $6 billion that they'll be in the hole, and that they'll have to make up for. So there's a lot going on here. There's a lot of shifting of money. There's a lot of shifting of expenses down to the county level. That's one of the reasons why the county is looking at a $5 million hole right now, because of all of the money that's shifting, the increase in taxes and fees. If anybody just try to get retitle or re-register their car, it's double the amount of money for 1 year to register your car now. I just got hit with that. I'm like, holy crow. So yeah, there's a lot of moving parts. Superintendent McComas' word of complex, this is a very complex situation, is spot on. I've been living here in Kent County for 32 years. I love it here, as everybody knows. And in my 32 years of being involved in this county, I have never seen it like this. Never.
Thank you.
Seen the financial. Sorry, I
That's
carried
okay.
on.
I always like to let people have an opportunity to speak, but I do want, but I agree, and I thank you again, because it is complex, right? And it's very tempting to go to sort of, well, I don't want to say the cheap shots, right? Oh, people don't like the school system. Oh, central office isn't being impacted. Oh, you know, it's easy to throw out things that people go to. You know, the world is falling, class size is increasing, schools will go out of control, right? It's easy to go to those types of things, but it's much more dynamic and much more complex.
Yes.
And what I do know is the talent we have is talent. Our people are working hard, absolutely. They are talented people. And one of the things I am very, again, hopeful for, I hope I didn't paint a utopia, but I think it's important as a leader to be forthright and clear, but also have hope, right? Because if we don't have hope, we might as well shut the whole thing down to hope, right? So we have to have hope as leaders, and we have to support others in seeing that tomorrow is another day, right? And we will live to see that next day. And I think, you know, one of the other things that to me is really powerful is our achievement. We have made some really dramatic changes at our elementary level in terms of Wharton Billington and literacy. And I encourage everyone, Mr. Walsh heard me say this, and I'll say it to the cows come home. If you look at last year's state test scores, look at grade 3. And why grade 3? I've had community members say, oh, well, you know, you can't just point to a particular grade. Yes, I can, and I will because that particular cohort tells it's a benchmark cohort. It's a group of students who came to school after the crisis of the pandemic. So their education has not been interrupted, right? And you can look at the other cohorts of students and see the impact of dramatic interruption. And while that is a new experience to us largely as Americans, right, with the exception of those in New Orleans with the Hurricane Katrina, there is research around students who have interrupted educational experiences, right? Because other parts of the world, they have, you know, environmental catastrophes, they have war, right? Think about the students in the Ukraine right now and the disruption to their education. So that was new for us, and but when you look at the data, you can see that impact versus the cohort that came after the crisis, right? And so again, you have to, when you're looking at the data, understand the context and make meaning of it. So I will go on, shall we do any other in-person? Yes, sir, thank you.
I get complication and nuance, but I want to look at a vein with you. Some of the loss in students is attrition, people moving out, giving up, whatever. Kent County has this other issue where, let's say, I'm just going to round numbers, 2,900-ish total kids 0 to 18, but 700-ish are not school age yet. So you're 2,200-ish, 1,600-ish in a school. The other 600 are private. They're residents here and they are going to private. And the private schools around here, or the ones that they drive a long way to go to, might be $6,000 a year to $60,000 a year. And every one of those students that isn't in a public school costs us state funding. And Kent County's already in this weird place because of our economic situation where we're like 60% locally funded and only 40% state funded about. And of the 24 districts in the state, we're like number 6 or 7 in how much we're locally funded. And some of them are 75% state funded, right? Where we are 60% locally funded. So I'm just realizing that there are parents who have not moved away out of state or out of county. They still live here. And they are choosing to cost the district $7,000, $8,000, $9,000 per kid of state funding to pay $6,000 to $60,000 to put a kid in a private school. And that math around that kitchen table is one, ridiculously privileged, and two, so painful to all the other students that are trying to survive the district that you're trying to organize. And I wonder, what is your message to private school parents?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, and I want to just highlight that that's the student population for the most part that you're bringing up. In many instances, are people who never chose Kent County to begin with, right? So I just want to distinguish that compared to when I was saying those who leave us, right? You come to us and then you leave us, right? So you're in many cases talking about families who have never chosen us as an option to begin with, right? So
the percentage of private school students to public has always been pretty big for Kent County.
Exactly. And so here, my message goes internally to us as an organization, is we need to, this gets back to the communication, right? When you think of the brand KCPS, what do you think of? Do we have anything, right? But if I say, what do you think of Under Armour? You immediately think of their logo. You immediately, you know what I mean? Like there's a brand that goes with our organization. And I think we need to lift that up. And that's part of the communication. That's part of me. One of the things, I guess, forgive me if I'm kind of going around my head about this, about one of the opportunities I had in life was to lead. I was a principal in Baltimore City Schools. And the school that I went into needed to be turned around. And we did that. And at the time when I served as a principal in Baltimore City, it was under the legislation of, I think it was No Child Left Behind was the legislation at the time. And as a result, in Baltimore City, parents could choose wherever their child went. No longer were you confined to your zip code, right? So what that did is it transformed the system into a marketplace. You had to learn how to recruit families to your school, because if your enrollment dropped, your school was closed, because they too had declining enrollment and they too had to close schools over many decades. And what I really learned as a school leader there was how important it is to have your team members understand who you are and what your brand is and how to communicate that, and then how to communicate that to families, to go out and actively recruit and market who you are. I think for many decades, public schools have taken for granted that students are coming. What I learned in that leadership opportunity is you cannot function that way. You have to think the way competitive organizations think, which is I don't take my customers for granted, right? I have to make myself not the default choice, but with the premier choice. Now, in doing that, that is what I believe, and that's part of what I believe we need to do. Our challenge is that takes resources, right? But again, it's hard for me to say, oh, we need to stand up our marketing, build our future, and communicate that when I'm in the process of right-sizing the budget, right? But there are things that we can do that are low cost and no cost to begin that effort, right? One of the things that I have committed to the board on doing is developing a communications campaign or public relations campaign, right? To actively get out and let people know the pathways that are being offered. Let people know the success that our students are having. Just the other day, I was in a conversation with our board president, and she was sharing with me one of their seniors who received an amazing scholarship, like a full ride scholarship to an impressive school. And as she was talking to me about our students, and then of course she was talking about other students in the past that she knew, and I could immediately, on Main Street in Chestertown, imagine on the light post those banners, right? Here's, here's student X, Y, and Z, and here's where they're going to college, and here's the gazillion of dollars of scholarships they got for their excellence, right? But we don't have those things happening yet. So that to me is my message. We have to internally understand that we are in a competitive environment. We can no longer take for granted that people are going to bring their students to us. We need to go out and market ourselves, and we need to be excellent in our outcomes, and we need to be excellent in our experience, and we need to have excellent communication. And so that is all work that we need to do to get there. So I hope I answered your question. That's the best I have for that. Should we do YouTube? Anything happening on YouTube?
Yep, I have a question.
Okay.
What can we as a community do to support the district during these budget challenges? Are there specific actions or initiatives we can take part in to help?
That is a lovely question. How can I help you? I think the most important thing is to be an ambassador on behalf of the school system, right? Certainly, you can advocate for resources for us, but I think what's most important is there's a lot of misperception I have experienced in the last, I guess, 11 months now, 10 months, however long, since July. There's a lot of disconnect between what people know and understand about our school system versus what is actually happening in our school system, right? And so being an active, positive ambassador on our behalf is always welcome. And, I'm working to open up our schools so that people can come in and see, the pandemic innately caused us to kind of lock down. And of course, in this day and age of school safety and security, we are constantly vigilant, right? So it makes us, kind of more reclusive than I think any of us really want to be. I know myself, I walk into schools and even when I walk for a superintendent, classroom doors are secure, right? Which we need them to be. But I remember the day when classroom doors were open, right? And you could hear what was going on. And so, be an ambassador, find ways to learn directly what's happening in our schools so you can be a first-hand accounter of what really is happening. Yes.
We've got someone here, Dalia Shoge, who's had a couple questions. Shoge, sorry.
Yes, thank you.
If you want to unmute yourself and ask your questions. Dalia, are you here?
Okay.
That we can just move.
If there's anyone else, I just want to do a time check. Is that clock right?
It's about 7 o'clock.
Yeah. I would like to try to wrap this up just because, why? I could talk till midnight. But so let's see if there's a virtual one, then we'll ask your question, and forgive me if I had my shoulder to your turn. Yeah.
Amy Bormia had signed up. They didn't have a question written down, but they're on the live if you want to unmute yourself and ask a question. Or if you want to ask in the comments too, if you're not comfortable talking.
I just, for those who are virtual or YouTubing, again, we have our budget link email on the website. So if you have questions that come up, either as a result of this forum or just things that come to mind, feel free to send in your questions through the email. We'll respond, we'll get those published. So, yes, ma'am. Thank you for your patience.
No problem. I really appreciate your transparency and desire to hear from all different aspects. As a parent and educator in this district for about 10 years now, and previously other districts, other places, I wondered if you have either a target class size or an acceptable class size that you're shooting for. I know you mentioned 22 before, so I wasn't sure if that was it or not. And then as some class sizes rise, or some are higher than that right now, I just wondered about, within the constraints of the budget and the changing things, the resources for children who struggle with behavior for all different reasons. And I had the wonderful opportunity to be part of a survey in the fall, going door to door for the local management board.
Oh, yes.
It was great, and I met a lot of great people in our communities, and heard some similar things again and again. And there's a lot of concern for our kids, and they're very concerned around the topic of bullying. So, hearing the possibility of class size increase, but I understand related to other places the numbers are saying, but that's kind of where my teacher mind and heart goes versus when we're already struggling with some of those things. How can we work within that to address?
Thanks for the opportunity. So what I would say is, your first part of the question is like, did I have a target class size? You know, in my own experience as a classroom teacher, I always found, and I was a high school teacher, and I do think in general, the older the child, the larger the class size, and of course, the more sort of accelerated child, right? Like if you've got a 16-year-old who's ready and taking dual enrollment classes, right? Their sort of behavior management is much less. And of course, the younger the children, the more that class size is helpful, right? Because they're just more frenetic and more all over the place. So I offer that as a philosophy, right? Is really more than I would, and I found, and in research that I have done, optimal class size is really typically 18 to 22. And as a classroom teacher, if you get a group of kids that's too small, there's almost not enough juice to make for an engaging lesson, right? But likewise, if it's too much, that can't really get everyone focused. So, and I think it also depends on the subject area, right? For example, we have 3 CTE programs who, because of safety reasons, those classes are capped, right? It's only 3. It's automotive, right? You pick up that equipment, culinary, and then
Also carpentry.
Carpentry. Thank you. I was like, so, and again, I think subject and grade level have influence there. I always caution against an exact number because, okay, let's say I say our number is 26 and then I get a new enrollment, which we need, and class goes to 27, and people are like, you have to, I can't afford to buy another teacher for one student and can't necessarily afford to buy another teacher and have classes of like 13, right? So I just offer that I think it's a discernment process. I would like to avoid classes larger than 27 if possible, but I know that that's not always true. I know I personally had classes of 33 at Aberdeen High School, right? Did I like it as a teacher? Heck, no. Did I teach my rear end off? Absolutely, right? I made the most of what I had to work with. And I am not saying that that's what I want for other people, but I have walked in those shoes. And I would like to avoid that. Your other question about resources around bullying, right? And I think, so much has to do with how classroom culture is, right? When I walk in and out of classrooms, and I know as someone who's led a classroom, right? The culture that you create in your classroom and then the culture in the whole school is synergistic. I'll use my experience as a principal in Baltimore City. I told you it was a school. When I got there, it was incredibly violent. And I will tell you, we happened to have difficulty with a large group of 7th grade young ladies. It became an ongoing issue. It began December 3rd and did not reach resolution until April. And it got bigger and worse. And we had moms and grandmas fighting in the street. Like, it was a thing. And as a result of that experience, I came into learning and experiencing restorative practices. And we had a grant that helped us do the professional development. And my faculty and I went full in on restorative practices. We did proactive circles with our students. And at first, those circles were really in response to something. And we learned. Originally, we were doing them in the morning. Then what we realized is we need to do them after lunch, right? Because in middle school, if something goes wrong, it's at lunchtime, right? And so then we were like, oh, we need to do our strategy at the right time of the day, right? And then it just became such a part of their culture. I do those restorative questions like the back of my head, be like, hey, John, okay, so what happened? What were you thinking? What are you thinking? How do we make that right? How do we fix what we broke? How do we heal what we injured, right? And it became a culture in our school and a culture in our classrooms. And I will say, when we fell off of those protocols, I remember one day clearly my 8th grade team leader came down to my office, and she's like, those 8th graders, behaviors are flaring up. And I said, are we doing our circles? And we had fallen off of doing our circles. I said, okay, well, we're not doing the proactive piece to build community, build cohesion, and to help try to get in front of those things. And then we have the restorative dialogue when something does go sideways, because as humans, things are going to go sideways, right? And so I think there's a lot of things that we have that we need to get stronger at. I know our middle school done some work with restorative practices, but I think we're still just in the kind of the early stages. Wouldn't you agree? And it takes commitment, it takes practice, as anything does, right? But it builds over time. That's one example of a strategy that we have. One of the things we do have in place in our schools to help support that is, of course, counselors and social workers, right? So I think that gets back to how are we utilizing the resources that we do actually have in place, and how committed are we to it? Because I know in leading a school with restorative practices, I had colleagues who were only half in. They did it because they knew the boss was expecting them to do it. And I had some who embraced it, and you could see really brought it to fruition, right? And so, we have to recognize our part of all of that. Thank you for the opportunity.
I have a question. Tyree Johnson asked, is Kent County Public Schools losing Title I funding?
Oh, great question, Mr. Johnson. No, we are not losing Title I funding, and that was one of the questions submitted, and then I'll publish in writing. Just for everyone's sake, Title I, Title II, Title III, Title IV funding are all federal grant funds. They are codified in law through Congress. And so to lose them, or for those funds to go away, take an act of Congress to undo that law. Now, I cannot predict what will happen in Congress. But as of right now, Title funds, Title I is to help support the level of poverty. As we've established, we have a high level of poverty in our public schools, and so we do get Title I funds. Title II, just for anyone who is listening, is for professional development for teachers and principals and IAs. I'm not sure if IAs, I always get confused. IAs can be, we can use that money for professional development for IAs or not. Pardon me, Title III is for English learners. Our ESOL, we have this is again part of their oversized central office. We have one person who is our ESOL coordinator, Cassie, what's her last name? Swayze, thank you. And her position is significantly funded by Title III, right? So she's central office, that makes us so big, but she spends most of, like 98% of her time actually in schools. So, so that's the facts versus the myth, right? So Title III is for English learners. Title IV is, I always forget the name of it, but I call it the grab bag. There's a lot of things you can use Title IV for, technology, right? So if you need to help replenish or the school systems that need to bring in technology, you can use Title IV funds for that. You can use it for social, emotional, school culture pieces. It's sort of a grab bag of things that you can use Title IV funds for. There are other title grants that we don't have the student population, like there's, I forget what number it is, but there's a title grant for a Native American population, if you have a high Native American population. So right now, the federal grant funds are not in jeopardy, the title grants. On that, I'll also take the opportunity, you may be aware that the federal government made a decision to not continue to reimburse school systems for their emergency COVID funds. And I know our state superintendent has pulled all that information together. And I think just this week she was testifying somewhere to try to get the reimbursement that we're due. For Kent County Public Schools, the amount that we are expecting not to be reimbursed by the federal government was thankfully just $7,900. And I want to thank Ms. Stewart. She does an excellent job of making sure that all of our documents are in place. And so we had all of our receipts that show where we are and what we have already covered that we just are not going to get reimbursed for. So. Okay, everyone, I'm going to cut you loose. Thank you so much for your time. For those of you who submitted some other questions, again, I will publish them. I will take time to go back through and select the questions that were brought verbally and through YouTube and add and get them published. Though they might not get fully publicly published until Monday because I've got to work through getting the questions again. But thank you so much for taking your extra effort to join me this evening. And if you know any neighbors who have questions, feel free to have them submit their